The air was heavy and thick with moisture at Cape Canaveral, Florida. A low grey sky pressed down on the vast open space, promising a storm that felt more like a threat than a natural occurrence. The ocean wind, carrying the sharp scent of salt and rain, whipped around the gantries and buildings of the launch complex. This was the stage for a moment of monumental ambition, the launch of the Perseus rocket, a creation of the private aerospace company Orion Dynamics. In the midst of the controlled chaos, Ben Carter stood out. At 38, he was a safety engineer, but his face told a more complex story. The lines around his eyes were etched not just by sun and wind, but by late nights and the quiet, persistent worries of a single father. He wasn't a man of many words. His expressions did the talking. A tight jaw when he was focused, a flicker of a smile when his thoughts drifted to his teenage daughter, Lily. For Ben, this job was everything. It was the stable salary that put food on the table, paid the mortgage on their small house in Titusville, and ensured Lily could dream of a future bigger than his own. He watched the final preparations for the launch with a professional eye, but a father's heart. He was a guardian, a protector, and today that responsibility extended to everyone on this site. Miles away, in the sleek, ultra-modern control room, Dr. Evelyn Reed was the eye of the storm. At 35, she was the chief scientist for Orion Dynamics, a woman whose every movement was an exercise in focused intensity. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun, and her eyes, though brilliant and sharp, held a guardedness that kept the world at bay. Evelyn was a scion of scientific royalty, but she had spent her life trying to escape the shadow of her family's legacy, to forge her own path. She had done so spectacularly, becoming a billionaire in the process, but the wealth and status came with a profound and isolating loneliness. Her world was a meticulously constructed fortress of data, equations, and achievements, with little room for the messiness of human connection. She was a genius, a visionary, but beneath the polished surface was a woman disconnected from the world she sought to conquer. The countdown was in its final seconds. The deep guttural roar of the rocket's engines was a physical presence, vibrating through the ground and the very bones of everyone watching. Ben felt it in his chest, a low rumble of power. The countdown timer on the big screen in the control room ticked down, T-minus 10, 9, 8. And then, the impossible happened. At T-minus 3, a catastrophic failure in one of the main engines wasn't just a misfire, it was an event of unbelievable violence. A blinding flash of light consumed the launch pad, followed by a concussive shockwave that ripped through the air. The explosion tore through the control room's heavily reinforced windows, sending shards of glass and twisted metal flying. The structure shuddered, groaning under the immense force. Dr. Reed, who'd been standing closest to the main observation window, was caught in the blast. She was thrown backward, pinned beneath a heavy slab of concrete and a tangle of cables. Smoke billowed into the room, thick and acrid, mixing with the haze of panic and disbelief. Alarms blared, a discordant symphony of chaos. Most people froze, their minds unable to process the scale of the disaster. But Ben Carter, driven by an instinct born from years of safety training and the deep protective impulse that defined him, didn't hesitate. He saw the fire, the smoke, the collapsed structure, and he ran toward it. He sprinted past the fleeing crowds, a single figure moving against the tide of panic. The air grew hot, the smell of burnt metal and chemicals stinging his nostrils. He found Evelyn trapped, her body half buried, a gash on her forehead bleeding freely. She was unconscious, her face smudged with soot and dust. Ben didn't know who she was, just that she was a person in desperate need. With a strength he didn't know he had, he strained against the heavy concrete slab. He grunted, his muscles screaming, but the thought of Lily, of the promise he'd made to always be there for her, fueled him. He managed to lift the slab just enough to pull Evelyn free. She was a dead weight in his arms, her head lolling. He hoisted her over his shoulder and carried her out of the burning structure, his lungs burning from the smoke, the heat a suffocating presence around him. The rescue teams, who had been slower to respond, finally arrived. Ben handed Evelyn over to them, his own body shaking from exertion and the smoke he had inhaled. The chaos slowly subsided, replaced by the grim reality of the disaster. Ben, his vision blurring, was himself taken to a hospital. He didn't know the woman he had saved was a billionaire, a titan of industry. All he knew was the image of her face, bruised and unconscious, and the feeling that in that single moment their lives had become irrevocably intertwined. Chapter 2. An Unlikely Connection. The hospital room was sterile and quiet, a stark contrast to the destruction that had landed him there. Ben Carter lay in a bed, a scratchy blanket pulled up to his chin, with a mild case of smoke inhalation. His mind, however, was replaying the fiery chaos of the launch site. He learned from the nurses and the television news that his heroic act had been caught on camera by one of the news crews covering the launch. He was now a viral sensation, the everyman hero who risked his life for a stranger. The media's portrayal felt alien to him. He was just doing his job, doing what he believed was right. Lily, his daughter, came to visit him. Her relief at seeing him safe, mixed with a look of awe and pride that made his chest swell. A few days later, a call came from Orion Dynamics. The CEO, he was told, wanted to meet him to personally express the company's gratitude. Ben, still a little weak but eager to get back to work, agreed. He and Lily drove to the Orion Dynamics headquarters, a sleek glass and steel monolith that seemed to mock the modest launch pad where disaster had struck. Inside, the opulence was a world away from Ben's own simple life. He was escorted into a plush, spacious conference room. It was filled with impeccably dressed executives, all whispering to each other, their faces a mixture of concern and relief. But Ben's eyes were drawn to a single figure seated at the head of the long table. It was her, the woman he had saved. She looked different now. The bandage on her forehead was small, a faint whisper of the trauma. Her hair was down, framing a face that, while still intense, held a new, vulnerable quality. It was Dr. Evelyn Reed, the woman he now knew was the brilliant, reclusive billionaire behind Orion Dynamics. When she saw him, her eyes, which had been so guarded, softened with a profound and genuine gratitude. She stood up and approached him, her hand outstretched. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice surprisingly soft, "there are no words. You saved my life. You went against every instinct for self-preservation, and you saved me." Ben, feeling awkward under the gaze of so many powerful people, just nodded. "I was just doing my job, ma'am." "It was more than a job," she insisted. "It was an act of pure courage." She then proceeded to make him an offer that took his breath away. "As a token of our eternal gratitude, and to ensure you and your family are taken care of for the rest of your lives, we are offering you a promotion to head of security, with a salary and benefits package that will allow you to retire comfortably whenever you choose." The number she mentioned was staggering, a life-altering sum that was a world away from his monthly paycheck. Ben, though stunned, felt a sense of unease. He was a simple man, a hard-working man. He hadn't done it for money. He was about to decline when Evelyn, sensing his hesitation, stepped closer. "Please," she said, her voice dropping, "this isn't charity. This is a way for me to honor the memory of those who were lost, and to honor your act of selflessness. You are the embodiment of what we should all aspire to be." Her sincerity was undeniable, and Ben, looking into her eyes, saw not a cold billionaire, but a woman shaken to her core, trying to make sense of a tragedy. He accepted. From that moment on, a strange and unlikely friendship began to form. Evelyn, a woman of immense power and wealth, was drawn to Ben's quiet humility and the simple, profound humanity he represented. She had spent her life in a world of ambition and abstract ideas. Ben's world was one of tangible love, daily struggles, and the warmth of a family. Their time together began as professional meetings about security, but slowly they started talking about their lives. Ben would tell her about Lily, about his late wife, about the small joys and large burdens of raising a child on his own. Evelyn, in turn, found herself opening up, confessing the deep loneliness and disconnect that came with her success. She was a genius in a lab, but she was lost in the world. Ben's quiet strength and grounded perspective became an anchor for her. He helped her see that life wasn't just about the next big launch or the next scientific breakthrough. It was about the small, human connections. In turn, Evelyn, with her boundless intelligence and resources, helped Ben in ways he never imagined. She saw his potential, not just as a security expert, but as a person. She encouraged him to think bigger, to believe in himself beyond the role of a single father just getting by. Lily, Ben's daughter, became an unexpected bridge between them. Evelyn, who had never known what it felt like to be part of a real family, found herself drawn into the small, everyday moments of their lives: movie nights on the couch, shared meals, Lily's school projects. The friendship deepened, evolving into something more complex and meaningful. Evelyn, for the first time, felt a genuine connection to another person, a sense of belonging. Ben, for the first time, saw a path not just of survival, but of true happiness. After the Perseus disaster, Orion Dynamics faced intense media scrutiny and public outrage. Accused of negligence, the company's reputation and stock plummeted. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the chief scientist, became the primary target of criticism. Ben Carter, now head of security, saw the toll this was taking on her, despite her stoic demeanor. Driven by loyalty and a gut feeling that the failure was no accident, Ben began his own investigation. With help from a former colleague, a cybersecurity expert named Dave, he discovered a subtle digital alteration in the rocket's pre-launch software. This was evidence of sabotage, traced back to a disgruntled former senior engineer who had been fired for embezzlement. With this crucial evidence, Ben and Evelyn presented their findings to the FBI, clearing the company's name. Although exonerated, the emotional and financial damage remained. To make amends, Evelyn made a bold decision. In a public press conference, she announced she would use a significant portion of her personal fortune to rebuild the company and create a fund for the victims' families. Her raw, emotional speech transformed her image, earning back public trust and employee loyalty. As they worked together to rebuild, their friendship deepened into a profound romance. Their relationship, forged in disaster, became a pillar of strength for both. The story culminates with the launch of the Perseus 2 rocket. Ben and Evelyn stand together, holding hands, watching the rocket ascend. This time, the sound of the engines is one of triumph, not tragedy. The launch symbolizes not only the company's comeback, but also their own journey of rebuilding, overcoming, and a love that found its way to the stars.